So first of all, thank you, Ralph, for having me. This is the first time that I'm talking about my career to, people that I have never met. So this is really exciting. Thank you all for being here. So my name is Daniela Candillari. I am a conductor and composer, and I am currently principal conductor at Opera Theater of St. Louis.
That's wonderful. And can you tell the kids a little bit about your education and your background and how you got into your profession?
Absolutely. So my education was, I started music school when I was really, really young. I was about 6 years old when I started taking piano lessons. I was born in Serbia and I grew up in Serbia, and then we moved to Slovenia. And the system that was in place and still is in place in both Serbia and Slovenia was that parallel to when we start the primary school, we can start music school. So I started solfege, ear training, and all of the sort of necessary music language courses about learning music and piano at the same time. So I was 6. However, before that, I got introduced to opera through my grandmother, who was an opera singer. And I started going to the theater since I think I was about 5. It's sort of the first experience that I had of experiencing live music, of experiencing what theater can be, what magical and fantastical world it really is. It totally blew my mind. And it also happens that the first opera I saw was Carmen, which is something that my grandmother used to sing, and now I'm conducting it. Actually, this is my first opera in St. Louis this year as I take on this new role. So it's been one of these experiences of seeing Carmen that I thought the music was written yesterday. It was so alive and so fresh. It was sung in Serbian language because that's what that theater did. So I thought it was written by a composer who was from Serbia, and I could not understand that this piece was written in 1875 and it was in French and it was by a composer who is no longer around us. So there was just such an aliveness about seeing that and sort of wanting to be in the theater. It was incredible. So then from my first piano music lessons, things progressed quite quickly in a different direction. I I started university when I was 15 and I applied to music university in Austria in Graz as a concert pianist, and that's what I got accepted and that's what I started studying. Now, I knew from really young and early age that I wasn't going to be a concert pianist. I don't know how I knew that, but I just knew that wasn't what I was supposed to do. And what I always loved doing was studying music. I loved sight reading music and I loved transcribing music, which then, of course, now fast forward came in really handy to working as a conductor and composer. But when I started my studies in Austria, I think my first or second semester in, I got approached by a clarinet player who was looking for a pianist to play Schumann for romances. And I said, "Oh, I can do that. I've never done it, but I thought, oh, that sounds great." And that's when I really fell in love with chamber music, working with other musicians, working on repertoire that wasn't necessarily solo piano only. And I mean, you could not get me out of chamber music. It was impossible. Like, I can admit this now, but back then I couldn't admit that I actually enjoyed practicing and rehearsing more chamber music than I did solo piano. So don't say that to any of my former professors. And then through work with chamber music and with musicians, I started it with instrumentalists. I started working with singers a lot, and quite a few people realized very fast that I'm fluent in languages, that I have easy access to languages. And so they started pointing me in direction of working as an opera pianist, working as a vocal coach. Through that, which is what I ended up doing, through that, I met about 3 different conductors who, independently from each other, they told me, "We think you're a conductor and we think you should address this." And it was a transition that I didn't believe necessarily that I could do, mainly because I never stood in front of an orchestra. I never stood in front of any type of ensemble. The sort of biggest ensemble that I played in at that point was with orchestra, but I never was the one leading rehearsals. And so I just thought there's no way I can do that. And then sort of life sometimes takes charge when we let it. And in my second year working as vocal coach, opera pianist, repetiteur at Slovenia National Opera, um, I got asked to step in as the chorus master for a period. And that was really sort of trial by fire. Let's see if I can do this. And obviously I could. And everything just made sense about my education up to that point, about everything that all these conductors were telling me that I can do. It just sort of like was a perfect storm of everything that I had been working towards. So then through working as chorus master, I started getting asked to work as assistant conductor a lot. And then slowly started getting my first productions. And here we are now in 2022.
Well, congratulations on the
Thank
continued
you.
success. That's absolutely wonderful. Do you mind if we just
Thank,
jump straight into student questions? We've already
not at
had
all,
some
please.
questions. Okay, first one comes from Italy, and this is Meb. She's a wonderful student. Meb, go ahead and ask. You had an awesome question.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you.
Hi. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. I would like to know, how does you always maintain a high level that everyone expects you to have? Because I mean, it's related to your preparation, or does it also concern the mind?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
It goes both ways. So I'm always studying, um, either for the production that I'm working on or the production that I'm preparing, or sometimes even two, three productions ahead. So there is a consistent studying time in my schedule, but there is also a consistent mental practice in my schedule and physical practice. So I personally have chosen yoga every day, and I really, really do it religiously. So it's yoga and meditation, for me, that help me maintain my balance, that help me focus and concentrate, and help me really sort of navigate myself. Now, I learned the hard way that, um, I had to be more vigilant about my personal practice and my personal care. There were a couple of times in the past, when I started conducting, when I started sort of taking this new role, which comes with very different responsibilities and very different set of requirements, that I would just sort of like, we say in my language, a fly without a head. I would just go from one project to the next, not really taking even a day to rest and relax. And I would always get sick. It wasn't anything major, but I would end up having flu or having a cold. And it was just long enough where my body would just sort of say, you have to stay at home. And then I would have to do that. I had no other choice. But then, I started again through this trial and error. I started learning, how much far can I go? When do I need to tune out completely? When is it enough of a study in a day? Days in theater can also be long sometimes. I have done 9-hour rehearsals in the past, and that's just rehearsal time. That's not preparation time. That's not going to rehearsal. That's not anything else. It's just physically being for 9 hours in a rehearsal room. And I think if you sort of prep yourself for that, it's a little bit like athletes. If you prepare yourself for that and you have a really strong sense of what your body needs, then you can navigate through that. But right now, I'm also really trying to keep one day a week completely work free, where I can, go for a walk, go to a museum, see friends, relax, and give my mind, and my body also a chance to sort of absorb everything that happened and move on from that.
That's great advice, and that can be transitioned to any profession, not just being
Yes,
a conductor. But you do need to take time for yourself. Even I know a lot of you guys are young academics, young scholars, but take time for your mental health and your physical well-being. So thank you for reiterating that. One of
absolutely.
our
If I can
Yeah,
just add,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry,
Yeah.
if I can add one more thing. Both my mom and my dad were athletes, and so I learned observing them, sort of what they needed to do, and I would often talk to them about mental breaks and, meditation and so on, and sort of how do you keep yourself protected, but also keep a certain standard for yourself. And athletes, I think, are so great in that. And I think there are so many parallels between athletes and artists in that regard that we just don't talk about enough often enough. But I think it's a conversation worth exploring and worth going deeper in.
That's a really wonderful point, and those parallels are very similar. One of our students here in the U.S., they have a microphone issue, but they wanted to know, can you describe a day in your work life?
So it depends whether it's a production or it depends if it's sort of my quiet home at time. I'll give an example for both of those. Um, so usually when we're in a production, we have 2 hours, two rehearsals a day, and it's usually 3 hours a rehearsal. So depending on the company, we can start at 10 a.m. and go until 1, have a lunch break, and then go from 2 to 5. Sometimes that can change, starting maybe at 11, going until 2, and then going 3 until 6. So that's usually the rehearsal period then, and a normal rehearsal day for opera. Um, so before that, I will do my morning routine. I will prepare myself for rehearsal, go to rehearsal, come back, catch up on any email communication, any other work that needs to be done, and then I'm done for the day. When I'm by myself, when it's sort of my preparation time, when I'm in between productions, I try to keep a pretty similar schedule. So I will still be really religious about my morning routine, which includes, as I said, yoga, meditation, breakfast, catching up on email, maybe talking to my family. It just depends on the day. And then I will go and study 10 to 1, take a lunch break and go study back 2 to 5, or adjust as needed. And then again, when I'm done studying, I might pick up some other work. Sometimes when I'm on the road, I tend to isolate myself a little bit on my days off. And sometimes that might mean that I will study much later in the day. It also depends how much work there is needed to be done. And also, I'm quite strict with myself in asking myself whether the work I wanted to accomplish that day has been accomplished. And if it hasn't, then no rest for the weary, for me personally. But if it has, then I will try to do something. I will again meet up with friends. I'm really fortunate that every city I've been to, I either have friends from school that I have known for a few years, or I will make friends within the company. So it's always good to have sort of a friendly face on the road and to be able to explore the city. Right now I'm in Chicago. We're on our production Fire Shut Up in My Bones at Lyric Opera of Chicago. And again, that's been the schedule that I've been keeping here. But I also think it's important with all of the work, again, to take breaks and to step outside and to sort of see other things that we may not have a daily chance to see them.
That's wonderful advice, and some of that stuff, like before, it can also be applied to other professions, making friends at different places. And those of
Absolutely.
you who go out into the work world or go out into college, whatever grade you guys are in, make sure friendly faces. So we have Pietro will be our next question. He's a violinist over in Europe. So Pietro, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm from Italy. And my question is, what's your favorite pianist and conductor?
Oh, ciao Pietro. That's a really good question. One of my favorite pianists that I loved listening to when I was playing a lot of Chopin was Arthur Rubinstein. I found that he had such directness in his sound, and he was so natural and matter of fact with interpretations, but it was always right. No matter sort of what way the interpretation went, I just felt he nailed it every time, literally. So he was one of my favorite pianists and still is to this day. I love Daniel Trifonov from the younger generation. I also I'm sorry, I'm giving you way more names than you asked for, but here we are. I also love listening to jazz, and in jazz, one of my favorite pianists is Brad Meldau, but there's also Norwegian pianist Tord Gustafsson. So if you have a chance to check them out, I would highly recommend that. And then with conductors, it really depends on the repertoire. I love Carlos Kleiva. His recording of the Rosenkavalier from Munich, I think it was 1979, is one of the most amazing recordings ever. I really love the things that Esa-Pekka Salonen is doing. Also, same is with Yannick Nézet-Séguin, Gustavo Dudamel, and there are also conductors like Osmo Venska in Minnesota Orchestra that I just have such huge respect for him, and Louis Longray in Cincinnati. So it really depends on the repertoire and sort of seeing their work.
Man, that was a lot, but it was great.
Yeah.
So we'll have a recording, Pietro, because I know there was a lot of names, but we'll have a recording for everybody. Hopefully we can make that available later today when the footage is processed. We'll do a few more questions and we'll let you go because we want you to get your rest before your big performance tonight. We have Mr. Strinka's class that is here in the United States. You guys can go ahead and unmute. You had a very good question.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, yes. Hi.
Hi, I've got a 8th grade general music class here, and one of my students asked, what would you say to a young person who wanted to try their hand at conducting, but isn't sure where to start?
So really, really good question. So I would actually advise in starting with chamber music. A lot of what we do as conductors is putting pieces together of an orchestra and understanding how those pieces are structured and how the composition works is incredibly important. In conducting, it's not so much about gestures. Quite frankly, I think to learn sort of basic patterns doesn't take longer than 30 minutes. So that's the easy part. The part that needs time and growing is understanding music and understanding psychology. So as young people, we can only work on understanding music. Psychology comes with experience. So I would advise in sort of immersing yourself with as many chamber music opportunities, whether it's singing in a choir, whether it's playing in an orchestra, again, whether it's playing with a duet, whatever it might be, but just finding a partner, a musical buddy that you can throw ideas out, that you can really start learning to collaborate. Conducting is an extremely collaborative art form, and it's also an art form where we need to tune our listening and we need to really be observant to everything that's happening around us and know how to process that fast. It will happen in performances that maybe a mistake happens, and sometimes that can derail things. And so the question for the conductor then is, how do you prevent that from happening? How do you solve a situation? So really understanding how sort of the pieces of the puzzle work is the best thing anyone can do. So again, I would just reiterate, joining a choir, joining an orchestra, chamber music, working with singers, learning about breathing. It's so important for every single instrument and everything that makes up music. So I would start there.
And I'm sure, like, to piggyback off of that, I'm sure there's some level with what you do as far as persevering through adversity when those mistakes happen during a live performance, which I'm sure is not very often at your level. But can
It's
you kind of
not, but
speak on
it can
that?
happen. It can happen. I mean, the one example, and this happens very often, and the conductors that I worked with, I've seen them navigate through different things. There are so many moving parts in opera, with staging, with singers, with orchestra. Again, depending on the size of the orchestra, it might be a chamber orchestra, it might be massive, like Strauss operas, Puccini, Turandot, and so on. And all of us are human. Everybody can make a mistake. Sometimes you might have a slip of a concentration for a second, and it can cause maybe an early entrance. So as a conductor, you need to sort of clock that in immediately and communicate with the person, connect with the person where a mistake may have happened, and just sort of, assure them that we're back on track, we'll get you back in, everything is fine. So it really is, sometimes a rehearsal process is really about getting to know the piece, for the people who have not been exposed to it yet, and really learning how this ensemble breeds and how we're shaping this piece. So that's the rehearsal process, where you sort of start addressing things and start maybe working on balance and working on interpretation and so on. But then when the performances happen within this frame that we've established in rehearsals, anything can happen. And again, we're all humans. Nobody's a robot. It's normal. Sometimes I will make a mistake, and I will admit to that. But then the question is, how fast can you bounce back? And so the bounce back should take no longer than a second or two. And that's really sort of the response that gets tuned into and sort of woodshed the longer we're working.
So there's not just a matter of persevering through adversity, but also leadership skills.
Yeah.
So one of our final student questions, well, the final student question, they wanted to know, and this is here from America, what is your proudest accomplishment? Because we know that you've accomplished so much in your storied career, but if you had to pick one that stands out above all the other ones.
Oh my God. Again, such a great question. And the answers can be just so many. Again, it depends, a successful production, maybe a really difficult transition, and so on. But I think one of my proudest accomplishments was I wrote this piece for my husband. He's a bass trombone player, and he was asking me constantly to play more recitals with him, and schedules were difficult and we couldn't really make it work easily and so on. And then a friend of us, who is a second trombone player with Pittsburgh Symphony, Jim Nova, invited us for a recital to Duquesne because my husband was already playing with Pittsburgh Symphony at the time. And there was that invitation, and I thought, okay, now we have to play together. But then my husband, who was also asking me for a piece to write for him, and I thought, okay, I have a deadline. I have to do something now. I can't get out of this anymore. So I decided to write this piece for him on a book that both of us really love and really touched us. It's a book, Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And I wrote this piece for him, which is a collection of 5 songs that are inspired by the book. And when I wrote it, I just wrote it for him. I sort of followed what was in my heart. I wrote the type of music I wanted to play and the type of music I wanted to listen to. And I thought that after that performance in Pittsburgh, the piece will never be played again. And I was completely okay with that. I thought this was a friendly invitation from a friend of ours. The stakes are not very high. If only we perform it now, it's going to be fine. Well, it took a few months for the piece to start sort of becoming a part of the traditional repertoire for bass trombone and piano. And I could not anticipate that at all. When I wrote the piece, it was really sort of writing from the heart from my husband because I wanted us to play something that was fun for both of us. And, now it's one of the pieces that is constantly requested at competitions. It's constantly played around the world. And it's really one of those proudest moments where you don't think of the outcome. You just sort of commit to doing the craft and creating something, and you don't think about where it can go. And it can go extraordinary places if you just sort of let things out of your control.
And for our students who aren't familiar with that novel that she talks about, that has to do with the events of September 11th. And I know a lot of you guys have met September 11th survivors through our platform. Okay, before we go, and I'll end it with my question. What kind of advice would you have for these kids as they go off in the world, whether they want to go into music or something completely different, as someone as accomplished as yourself? What kind of advice would you impart to them?
So one thing I actually read about this showed up on my Instagram today by Adam Grant, the author, and it was such a brilliant, serendipitous message to get, and it's something that I strongly believe in. So when I started music, I didn't know that I was going to be a conductor. I didn't know where I was going to end up. The main thing that was constantly driving me was my curiosity. So as I said earlier, I always enjoyed analyzing music. I always enjoyed making music. I enjoyed being in the creative process, but I didn't necessarily have an end goal in mind, and I still don't. So I'm constantly fueled by curiosity and wanting to learn how things are made and what makes something great. So my advice would be follow your curiosity. There are things we can control and there are things we can't control. And the things we can control are what we value, what your curiosity is, and your ethic and your work. What we can't control is what that might open. And again, as I mentioned with the piece that I wrote, if you commit to doing the best that you can, amazing things can happen. It's mind blowing what can happen. But just make sure you're always true to your course and to your values and to what you think matters and what your responsibilities are.